In California's far north, a gray X squats on the edge of the map, Pelican Bay. The name alone makes yards go quiet. This is the joint where steel eats light. Time runs the program, and every move can stamp years on your back. Shot callers learn to pass word through vents and drains. COs posted up in glass and gun towers, and policy came with teeth. Some call it control. Others call it pain with a purpose. The question is, what turned a prison into a legend of fear? And what happens when the walls finally start to listen? We're diving into the code, the pressure, and the politics behind the short corridor, and the box that made California flinch. Join us as we break down why Pelican Bay became the most feared prison in the state. Pelican Bay State Prison sits at 5905 Lake Earl Drive in Crescent City near the Oregon line. The yard spreads across 275 acres on the cold north coast, named for the shallow bay 2 miles to the west. It is set in a detached part of town, a few miles north of the main streets, where fog hugs the fence and distance does the rest. From the start, the location sent a message to every car on the main line. This spot is far, tight, and built for heavy control, and what happens inside will not be softened by what sits outside. The prison opened in 1989 to handle a growing maximum security population. It was sold as a prison of the future. Modern buildings, cutting-edge security. The grounds and operations were physically divided so staff could lock in control and keep the program firm. The build was Supermax by design. It was made for discipline, safety, and order. If you were a shot caller or a problem for the system, this was the address you did not want. People knew the state had raised the stakes, the concrete, the layout, the rules. All of it said the same thing, and the tone only hardened as years rolled forward. At Pelican Bay, the security housing unit, an X-shaped cluster that, at its peak, consumed half the prison and now spans about a quarter, packs 1,056 windowless cells and 132 pods of 8, watch from control booths that cover 6 pods at a time, while 3 gun towers scan the blocks around the clock. Doors are perforated steel that kill light and lines of sight for the people inside, block thrown spears, and open by remote. Each 8 by 10 foot cell holds concrete bunk ledges with foam pads, a steel sink toilet combo, and 2 concrete cubes for a desk and chair with a tiny skylight lighting the tier, not the cell. Bare concrete pins with 20-foot walls and a screened lid, more satellite cell than yard, while showers and yard run on a rigid schedule. Meals slide through a slot. The library is a cage. Visits are behind thick glass. There are no jobs, no programs, no phone calls, and staff contact is minimized and in restraints. If you want to talk, you shout through mesh until a CO tells you to shut up. Voltage wraps the fence at 50,000 volts of stay back. About half the SHU is double-celled and half single, but forced closeness curdles into paranoia and violence because the build is the point. It kills angles, starves numbers and noise, blurs sight for the people inside, and gives the towers clean shots. In a place like this, metal and glass hold minds as much as bodies, and policy and time finish the work. The box runs the clock, not the other way around. The SHU took the fear and gave it a home. Half the joint holds level 4 inmates in a general population setup with 2-man cells. Another part houses level 2 in an open dorm style that fits 500. There's also a level 1 facility for 400 minimum security inmates outside the main perimeter. The split lets the system move different custody levels without mixing heat the wrong way. On the main line, you keep your program tight. If not, the path is clear. You can feel the SHU waiting, and the change from GP rhythm to SEG silence lands hard. A group of Pelican Bay prisoners filed a civil rights case under Section 1983. They spoke for everyone locked there now or later. They said the state was crossing the line on basic rights and asked the court for orders and clear rulings. No money talk, just fix the rules. That move turned the spotlight on the most feared yard in California and set the clock on a hard review. The court said Pelican Bay is really 3 separate places. First is a maximum security prison with about 2,000 men in general population. Their daily routine looks like other max yards in the state. Second is the security housing unit, the SHU, in its own complex behind the perimeter. Third is a small minimum security facility with about 200 people. Put it together and you get between 3,500 and 3,900 locked up on any given day. The SHU earned a reputation that speaks for itself. It was built to be harsher than anywhere else in California. About 1,000 to 1,500 men stayed isolated, 22 and a half hours a day in windowless cells, no jobs, no group yard. Assignment was not about your original case. You landed there for prison gang ties or serious write-ups. The state even used the phrase, the worst of the worst. That label stuck to the still and to the men. The court said this was not about broken pipes or rat nests. The bones were clean. The fight was about what those systems did to people and whether the shiny gear hid cold indifference to 1st, 8th, and 14th Amendment rights. The prisoners laid out 7 main hits. 1. Staff used excessive force as a pattern in practice. 2. Medical care fell short. 3. Mental health care fell short. 4. The SHU conditions were inhumane. 5. Cell assignment put men at unreasonable risk of assault. 6. The SHU segregation process for prison gang affiliates lacked real safeguards. 7. Access to the courts was not adequate. Each claim touched a different pressure point of daily life. Named as defendants were Warden Charles Marshall, Chief Deputy Warden Terry Peets, Chief Medical Officer A.M. Astorga, and CDC Director James Gomez. In short, the bosses. They denied every claim. They said Pelican Bay stayed inside the Constitution. They also said the SHU did exactly what it was designed to do. It isolated the most brutal and disruptive inmates and reduced violence in state prisons overall. That was their line, and they held it. Trial ran from September 14th to December 1st, 1993. Right before the first witness, the judge toured Pelican Bay for 2 days with both sides and prison brass. Inside the courtroom, 57 lay witnesses took the stand. Class members spoke, defendants spoke, staff at all levels spoke. Over 6,000 exhibits came in, from documents to tapes to photos, plus thousands of pages of depositions. The file got heavy. The record was built to carry weight. No one in that room was neutral. The court said it straight. Inmates, defendants, and staff all had skin in the game. There was also what everyone called a code of silence. The evidence showed this code pushed employees to stay quiet about other employees, especially on excessive force. Break the code, and you invite payback. The judge watched faces, weighed demeanor, and kept that code in mind when judging who to believe. 10 experts took the field. On force and operations, the plaintiffs brought Charles Fenton, Steve Martin, and Vince Nathan. The defense brought Daniel McCarthy and Larry Dubois. On medical, mental health, and SHU conditions, plaintiffs called Dr. Armin Start, Dr. Stuart Gracian, and Dr. Craig Haney. The defense called Dr. Jay Harness and Dr. Joel DeVoskin. The judge noted that expert opinions do not decide what is cruel and unusual, but they do help show effects and risk. Science and stats can explain harm, even if law draws the line. Not all experts prep the same. The court pointed out big differences. For example, Steve Martin reviewed over 1,000 documents, including every incident report for cell extractions and shootings through discovery, plus internal affairs files, tapes, training materials, grievances, and many depositions. He also spent days at Pelican Bay, toured, interviewed inmates, and met staff. By contrast, Larry Dubois said he spent about 20 hours reading documents and 2 days on site. That gap mattered when the court weighed whose read carried more. The court started from a hard truth. Keeping a maximum security prison safe is brutal work. Staff will need to use force at times. As one expert put it, it is as dangerous to use too little as it is to use too much. That line set the frame. Legit force can be necessary to keep order, but the same setting also carries a huge risk of abuse if the systems to control force are weak or missing. The SHU is a world apart. Walls, gates, and guards cut off the normal sounds of life. Custody staff meet frustration and hostility daily. They hold weapons, outnumber inmates with manpower, and control every move. In that sealed space, the usual brakes on behavior fade. If leaders do not supervise tight and track uses of force, misuse starts to look normal. That is the slope the court kept pointing at. A big slice of the trial focused on excessive force. There were stacks of incident reports, internal affairs files, and tapes. Dozens spoke, from inmates to officers to brass. After weighing it, the court said the 8th Amendment had been repeatedly violated at Pelican Bay. In some scenes, there was no justification to use force at all. In others, force might have been justified, but the amount was way out of line, more like harm for harm's sake than a good faith effort to restore order. The court said this pattern was likely strongest in the early years and still present at trial time. Plaintiffs' experts said Pelican Bay ran beyond the norm. Vince Nathan said the level of unnecessary and excessive force there was like a different universe, and that it was open, acknowledged, tolerated, and sometimes expressly approved. The judge also tied the pattern to weak systems for regulating and monitoring force. It was not just mistakes, it looked like deliberate indifference and a knowing willingness to let harm happen. The court split its findings into 3 parts. Then it moved to a sampling of the evidence, from staff assaults to punitive cagings in harsh conditions. That is where the details start to bite, and where the next beat in this story walks into the room with receipts. January 31st, 1991. Arturo Castillo refused to hand back his food tray after an officer used slurs. Small in build, no weapon, no threats, mattress up like a shield, waiting for the hit. A sergeant warned it would be very painful. Gas rounds fired, a taser in his chest and stomach. Then COS rushed the cell. A sergeant hit Castillo in the head with a 38mm gun by the butt of the gun. He blacked out, woke on the floor, getting stomped and batoned, scalp peeled, blood everywhere. The report said he fell on the toilet. The court did not buy it. Not when a sergeant with a clean view backed Castillo. Not when the medical read said high velocity blow to the top of the head, maximum force over a tray, and the next case lands even uglier. October 1991. Richard, slight build, a victim in a lab scuffle, never swung on staff. In a cage later, a CO said he heard Richard hit an officer. Richard denied it. Officer Braid dragged him into a counselor's office, shoved him into a table, then, while cuffed, beat the same side of the face already cut. Blood sprayed. Other officers watched. 2 days in pain before the infirmary called it. Fractured jaw, 6 weeks wired. The prison tried to pin the brake on the lab fight. Records in the chief doc cut that story down. Even a captain smelled the code of silence. Punishment, not order, and the pattern keeps stacking. In the same year, Martinez spit on Officer Parson and threw a tray. Gas gun rounds, team rush. He fought, then got cuffed and dragged out. From the tier, inmate Louis Lopez saw him limp, out. Then watched COS kick his head, face, neck, shoulders. A booth officer confirmed kicks after restraint, and someone finally yelled, "That's enough, knock it off." 4 teeth gone, head split, body scraped up. Whatever force might be used inside a hot cell ended once he was down. What came next, the court said, was retaliation, and it did not stop there. Kenneth Ward mouthed off, got told to cuff up through the food slot. He says COs twisted his wrist, yanked his arm deep into that narrow port, and then drove body weight into it. The bone snapped. Even the officers heard the pop. Ward went shocky, later felt nerve hits and spasms. The court called the force enormous, the threat low, the safer options ignored. The motive was right there. "You like disrespecting my old lady, huh?" And the yard knows what happens when anger runs the program. Cooper was in cuffs and leg irons, pressed to the wall by multiple COS. 2 officers saw he was under control. Officer Plumlee still put 2 closed fist shots into Cooper's face. The medical notes matched, contusions and a black eye. Plumlee said it was reflexive. The record said otherwise. 2 punches, no threat, no need, just pain. And the court kept moving. Von Dortch, doing 10 years for grand theft, mentally ill, had smeared feces. A shower sat near his cell. Instead, COs hauled him across to the SHU infirmary tub. Hands cuffed behind his back, an officer pinning his shoulders. A nurse heard a CO say they would have a white boy before this is through, mocking how the skin would peel. And it did. From below the buttocks down, skin hung in clumps, legs turned white and red. No one called medical at first. A CO shrugged off infection risk. Only when he started to fall did they move him to the ER. Severe burns do not scream right away. Nerves die first. The court said they may not have planned third-degree burns, but the bath was a punishment, a dirty kind of payback. John Brown was carried out in full restraints. A staff member later told investigators he saw a CO kick Brown in the face in front of a lieutenant, a sergeant, and a program boss. Brown said he was kicked 3 or 4 times. Medical wrote up facial cuts and abrasions that lined up with boots. No struggle, no threat, just kicks. The court read that as malicious harm, not security, not order. The fetal restraint, hands cuffed, legs in irons, chain pulled tight so wrists and ankles sit inches apart. Sometimes officers cuffed behind the back, ankles hauled up, used again and again until late 1991 or mid-1992, often for kicking a cell door. Pain climbs fast, breathing can get risky, no expert defended it. One called its use here unprecedented. Even the state's veteran expert had never used it and would not accept it. And yet, in this SHU, It became the first move, not the last. Mark Jones kicked to get the booth's attention, cold air blasting through the exercise pod door. They chained him in fetal restraints for 5 hours. Another day, the TV was dead. The booth ignored him. He kicked again. 9 hours chained, woke up with limbs asleep, rolled wrong, fell off the bunk, smashed head and shoulder. When med time came, an officer mocked him. Get up and get your medicine. Later, after a beef over a confiscated book, COs chipped his teeth on a wall and caged him in fetal restraints for 4 more hours. Security claimed thin, pain plain. That is how a tool turns into a weapon. Some officers went further. Fetally restrained inmates chained to toilets or fixed points, especially under a SHU program administrator named Ripito. A sergeant said he saw 10 to 12 like that across shifts. When he objected, he got told because we can do it. And this is Pelican Bay State Prison, and if you don't like it, get out. We're going to do it our way. Records show dozens of fetal restraints from 1989 to 1992, some up to 24 hours, most 3 to 6. Policy even let staff keep a man chained for 12 hours without the warden. Cells kept kicking anyway, so the chains kept stacking. The state said fetal restraints were needed because door retainers had metal fatigue. But fixes were vague, timelines fuzzy, and another wing with the same defect used the fetal restraint less than 5 times, while the first wing used it dozens. If it was about doors, the numbers would match. They did not. Full 4 or 5 point restraints would have stopped kicking without pain. The record showed the state knew this. Yet the hog tie stayed the go-to, and then came cages. Outdoor metal cages, phone booth size, public view, used as holding pens. One winter day, an education supervisor saw 2 men caged naked in pouring rain. She walked back an hour later. One was still there, body covered in goosebumps, begging for shorts and a t-shirt. A CO shrugged and said it was lieutenant's order. She learned it was Slayton on duty and let it go. Cross that officer, you pay. In a yard like this, power does not whisper, it shrugs. Johnny Barnes said he was caged naked on a misty day, bleeding from nose and mouth after a fight with COS. Left an hour and a half, no medical, in full view of anyone walking by. He felt like just an animal or something. Slayton first denied nude cagings, then admitted brief ones, and called clothing a common dignity. The court did not buy the brief part. These cages sit where everyone can see them, including lieutenants. When the rain hits and a man stands naked and still, that is not order, that is humiliation. And the file still has more to say. A cell extraction means pulling someone out of a cell by force. It is a tool every max yard needs, but at Pelican Bay the move ran hot, weapons stacked up. COS called it a very, very violent maneuver. Everyone agreed it should only happen when the threat is real. For 26 months up to February 1992, there were 205 extractions, about 94 a year. Then policy shifted. In the next 16 months, only 26, about 19 a year. That near 500% drop showed the early pace was not about safety, it was about how the program was run. Before the drop, full teams hit cells for small stuff, not handing back a tray, holding a jumpsuit, a pair of shoes, a skull cap. No imminent threat, but the arsenal rolled anyway. Discipline could have run through write-ups. Instead, pain came first, paperwork later, approval from a supervisor, 4 officers in helmets and pads, shield man, baton man, cuffs and irons, and MTA on standby. Before entry, 38mm gas gun rounds, mace, and often a taser. Then the shield drove the inmate into the wall, while the baton struck fast to the shoulders. Tasers hit like a 4x4, sending 40,000 to 50,000 volts. Used in roughly 70% of extractions before late 1992, often for 5 to 7 seconds. Gas guns fired rubber blocks that ricocheted around a tiny cell and could crack teeth or worse. Batons left welts where policy said they should not. Luis Fierro refused to return his dinner tray after a haircut dispute. Reports say gas gun rounds fired, mace sprayed, taser shots landed in legs, chest, and arm. After entry, he was briefly restrained. Medical notes showed bruises to back and face that the weapons could not explain. At times, the same officer who was hurt or disrespected earlier got placed on the next extraction team. Even lieutenants said that was normal for a while. Everyone knows that fuels payback. When anger suits up, restraint falls off. That choice tells you what the mission really was. Too many extractions, too much hardware for low-level heat. too many injuries that reports could not justify. One expert called it a ritual of inflicting punishment. The routine felt less like control and more like a message to the whole car. And the next page gets even darker. Pelican Bay runs guns in the housing units in the yards. Booths and towers watch with rifles while the SHU pods sit under armed glass. Most big systems do not do this inside the blocks. Policy says firearms only when absolutely necessary and as the force of last resort, but shots came too fast. The court did not say arming staff was illegal. It said the uses showed officers jump to lethal tools before a life or death threat was real. Not usually malicious, but reckless. Often because brass had not given safer options or wrote policies that pushed gunplay first. That chill from the top matters. Size is no shield. Even with the code of silence and vague reports, the record showed a pattern. One expert called it clear and unmistakable. Another said, "I've just never seen anything like it. No parallel." Force became a go-to move to punish and make the car feel pain, not just to control. Control needs clean rules. Instead, Title 15 was too broad, DOMS and post conflicted, and key gaps stayed open. Taser policies clashed on when and how long to shock. Incel assault rules were missing early on. SHU warning shot policy flipped back and forth. The SHU operations manual sat under revision for years while practice ran ahead. Training questions lingered, but the bigger miss was supervision. Reports were generic and copy-paste. Red flag injuries got no follow-up. Whistleblowers risked heat and saw no results. No videotaping of extractions. The warden stopped reading full reports and never watched the hard uses in person. When command shrugs, the tier writes its own rules, and the next pages show how that played out. Pelican Bay leans on guns inside the blocks and pods, so tight supervision should be locked in. But the court found that real oversight was almost missing. The same lazy posture seen with non-lethal force showed up with gun use, and the fallout was deadly serious. Every trigger pull was supposed to get reviewed by a shooting board or team. Yet records showed at least 24 rifle shots across 19 incidents with no review at all, and 30 or more shots tagged with numbers, but no proof anyone checked them. Uncounted heat on the tier means unlearned lessons and more risk. Rules said a shooting review team needed a chair and 3 ranks. For years, Pelican Bay ran SRTS as a single administrator. One person reading one story. That setup wasn't oversight, it was cover, and it told the yard that gunplay wasn't getting serious scrutiny. Reviewers took officer write-ups at face value, even when the reports didn't justify lethal force. Witnesses weren't interviewed. Some reviewers didn't even know the policies. One admin said, "I can't second-guess the officer." That turned the review into a pass, and the next claim shows how easy that pass became. Over and over, officers said they saw stabbing motions. No weapon found, no cuts on anyone. Still, that phrase greenlit the shot. The court called it what it looked like, either a mistake that needs training or a story that needs discipline. Pelican Bay did neither. IAD opened force cases, but ran them like a not guilty machine. They pushed criminal-level proof, ignored obvious red flags, and twisted facts to absolve staff. One expert called the shooting review a farce. The warden couldn't recall a single bad review, and that blind spot spread. In Calhoun's escort, Officer Hlebo said a CO slammed Calhoun's face into a wall and a sergeant choked and slapped him. IAD still cleared the sergeant. In Martinez's extraction, a booth officer saw a kick to the head after restraint, yet IAD discounted it and even erased the involved CO from the scene. 4 teeth gone, and the report only guessed. Sustained cases were rare. When one officer punched a cuffed inmate twice, the warden dropped all action. Another officer who slammed Calhoun's head got a simple reprimand for language, not force. The message to the car was loud: misuse heat, catch no real time. And the next layer of this file cuts even deeper. Pelican Bay was new, opened early, and the heat was high. Even the top dog said procedures are typically ragged when we start a new institution. That might explain a few stumbles, but it does not excuse the duty to run the joint by the Constitution. The court looked for growing pains, and then saw something colder. Stacks of incident reports, internal affairs files, and memos put the violence in black and white. Experts said any halfway alert admin could see the pattern. The risk of inmates getting seriously hurt was obvious. Leadership knew that risk sat in the yard every day and still kept it moving. Some practices stopped after the lawsuit hit, but not in writing and not with any real promise. No one at the top admitted a problem or said the word excessive. The tweaks looked temporary, like moves made for court day, not culture change, and that silence kept the door open for the next beatdown. Clear policies were missing. Supervision was soft. Investigations ducked the hard questions. Discipline barely tapped anyone. One glitch could be an accident. All of them together looked like a green light. The message to the yard was simple: use force and the house has your back. When asked about a broken jaw and blood on the floor, the warden showed no worry. When handed an incident report that screamed for follow-up, the chief deputy saw nothing worth a second look. That is not confusion. That is deliberate indifference, and it lands heavy. One expert said Pelican Bay ran where people were cruelly treated as an administrative device. Another called it a lawless, violent place. A third said some folks were obsessed with pain to send a message. The court agreed. This wasn't random. With no SAU policy locked in, no non-lethal option in key booths, sanitized reports, and a code of silence left to bloom, the brass let pain be the point. And while the yard told one story, the clinic was about to tell another, one that hurt in slower, deadlier ways. From day one, Pelican Bay packed men with serious head problems, and experts said the services were grossly inadequate. A cursory review showed hundreds already on heavy meds, with many more needing help. Stack that with the SHU's pressure, and you get minds cracking fast, which is part of why this joint stays feared. They launched the prison with no resident psychiatrists, just hit-and-miss visitors. For years, it was 2 psychologists trying to triage chaos. By trial time, the roster grew, but even defendants' own doc couldn't call it adequate. The hustle stayed crisis mode. Whoever melted down loudest got seen first. Screening was weak. MTAS, with little psych training, did quick pass-throughs, and custody referrals were uneven. Records were messy and contradictory, with suicide watch notes split from medical charts. On the SHU tiers, clinicians rarely walked the blocks, so a lot of sick homies stayed invisible. No inpatient beds on site, transfers for hospital or intensive outpatient care dragged from days to months, and some came back unchanged. There was no on-site process to medicate when someone was too far gone to consent, so the most dangerous minds sat spinning. Housing calls ignored clinicians, so even acutely ill or suicidal men stayed in the SHU. No real peer review, no working quality assurance. Suicide prevention was a handbook and a quiz, not a program. Treatment jumped from labels like malingering to heavy antipsychotics with chaotic follow-up. The pain was real. Seriously lacking became the daily script. Leadership knew the need and the risk, yet moved slow. Remote location or hiring drama didn't change the duty. The signal felt clear on the yard. Minds could break before help arrived. And then comes the SHU itself, the place built for the hardest cases, where the rules get even tighter and the clock gets louder. Even the former warden called it virtual total deprivation. Cut off from touch and noise, inmates show RES-type symptoms: hallucinations, paranoia, panic, rage, and broken focus. In Dr. Gracian's pulls, 17 to 50 were acutely psychotic and needed hospital care. Many others spiraled hard after SHU placement. Some hold it together, but the vulnerable, the already ill, brain-injured, or impulse-ridden, crack fastest. A psychiatrist, Dr. Terry Coopers, put a name on what a lot of Pelican Bay men were feeling after release from SHU, post-release syndrome. He laid out the symptoms: being overwhelmed by noise and light, massive anxiety in crowds, hyper-awareness of every sound and flicker, a drive to hide in small spaces, and trouble opening up in close relationships. Leaders knew the SHU was built to starve the senses and that RES could wreck people. A 1989 memo flagged excluding the seriously ill, yet that warning got shrugged. Instead of changing the setup, many were just medicated or ignored while the doors stayed shut. There's no written rule to single-cell men with a history of jumping cellies. Result: 1,158 cell fights in just over 3 years, with repeat hitters kept double-celled and victims stacking injuries from broken ribs to brain damage. Level 1 inmates sometimes landed with level 4s while waiting clearance. A deadly mismatch. Get validated on 3 items, often CI-based, and you're SHU-bound on an indeterminate term. Real way out is to debrief, naming names, which brands you a snitch and puts a target on your back. Reviews come, but they rarely reopen the label. In court, the play was clear. Administrators showed deliberate indifference, even a knowing willingness to let harm happen, and quick policy tweaks after lawsuits didn't cut it. The court found not a few dirty incidents, but a pattern. Injuries were serious and lingering. Under Hudson, once force is used to cause harm, contemporary standards of decency are crossed, so the harm is objectively grave. Medical and mental health care were systemically broken. Short staffing, weak training, botched intake, slow treatment, no real emergency playbook, chaotic records, amounting to deliberate indifference, not slip-ups, and fitting the Eighth Amendment's unnecessary and wanton infliction of pain. The SHU wasn't per se unconstitutional for everyone, but it was cruel and unusual for people with serious mental illness or comparable vulnerabilities, borderline, brain injured, impulse disordered, profoundly depressed. And officials knew the risks and kept pressing. By contrast, the record didn't yet prove a class-wide, pervasive risk from cellmate assaults or from temporarily housing level 1 inmates with level 4s. Serious warnings, but not class claims. Aware of its limited role, yet bound to enforce the Constitution, the court held 2 core violations. Number 1, constitutionally inadequate medical and mental health care, and number 2, a pattern of excessive force, while rejecting other challenges, general SHU conditions for resilient inmates, inmate-on-inmate force claims, and most gang validation or indeterminate SHU assignment attacks, save a narrow exception noted elsewhere. For relief, it ordered the least intrusive, effective fix, but found intervention indispensable. Appointed Thomas F. Lonergan as special master under Rule 53 to help craft and monitor a narrowly tailored remedial plan. Directed the parties, with the master, to submit that plan in 120 days with 30-day progress reports, retained jurisdiction until full compliance, and provided that if they can't agree, the special master will recommend solutions subject to objections. By 2001, the homies in S-Edge were out of moves, so they used the only weapon they had left: hunger. On July 1st, about 700 men in Pelican Bay's SHU and around 300 at Corcoran refused their trays, calling out the label game that sent guys to the box forever. The state said it was gang validation, but a lot of it came from confidential kites and forced debriefs. Snitch on your car, stand next to the wrong dude, sign a get well card, even help on legal work, and you could get stamped as gang. Steve Castillo had already been fighting this since the mid-90s, and in 1999 the rules shifted to say you could leave SAU after 6 years clean of gang activity, but they never said what activity meant, so COs and investigators held all the keys. Castillo put it plain: the main basis for our protest is that CDC refuses to implement clear, fair, and uniform standards. Families did not even know the strike was on because the media went dark. The next day, July 2nd, the Barrio Defense Committee and allied groups rallied in Sacramento. A week in, Senator Richard Polanco stepped in, promised to investigate and mediate, and the men paused the strike on July 10th with a deadline. Fix this by January 2002 or we're back at it. Meetings ran through the year, even inside Pelican Bay, but by summer 2002, the policy still hadn't moved. On October 19th, 60 to 90 men at Pelican Bay restarted the hunger strike. It thinned out, but the last 11 held almost 4 weeks and dropped up to 30 pounds. Donald Johnson's words hit like a kite from the hole. There is an alternative to accepting solitary confinement forever. My food strike protests the use of solitary confinement, and I protest the use of the debriefing policies. The state refused changes, said it would review 1,154 SHU cases starting January 2003. That first wave was a warning shot. Bigger waves were coming, and Pelican Bay was about to show why it is the most feared yard in California. By the summer of 2011, the short corridor shot callers were done playing quiet, so they lined up a move the whole state would feel: a hunger strike, larger than any other, with simple, hard demands. In June, men in Pelican Bay's sensory deprivation cells started sending joint statements to groups on the street, asking for help and making sure the governor heard them. They built a squad on the outside too, the Prisoner Hunger Strike Solidarity Coalition, with crews like Critical Resistance, California Prison Focus, and the Prison Activist Resource Center Riding Point, and LSPC helping coordinate. Inside, the high ranks from the Aryan Brotherhood, Mexican Mafia, Nuestra Familia, and Black Guerrilla Family did what the system said could never happen. They talked it out across race lines, yelling through walls and using toilets and drains to pass kites. They were studying. quoting Bobby Sands, who died on a hunger strike, and speaking on George Jackson's call to settle your quarrels, come together, do what must be done. On July 1st, 2011, several thousand at Pelican Bay joined more than 6,000 across California and refused trays for 19 days, with demands that were basic and sharp: warm gear, a handball for the tiny yard, one phone call a week, real food, and a meaningful review after years in the hole. The deeper push sat under that list like a blade, in the label game and the snitch pipeline that kept men locked in seg forever. The 5 core demands hit the nerve on the tier and at the Capitol. No more group punishments by race, kill the debriefing policy and fix the gang validation rules, follow the 2006 National Commission and make isolation a last resort, serve adequate and clean food, and open up programs and small privileges like weekly calls and sweats so men could touch a little humanity. This was not theater for cameras. On July 8th, 2013, the yards went quiet again and a statewide shockwave hit. Upwards of 29,000 prisoners joined in, blasting the same target as before: cruel validation policies that parked people in solitary for years, and the need to fix living conditions that mocked the word human. It ran for 2 months. Dozens hit the hospital. By August, lawmakers were listening, with hearings that put Pelican Bay's SHU on record as daily reality all over again. Phones that were usually dead were suddenly legal for calls to the lawyers and coalition because the numbers made it impossible to pretend nothing was happening. The state felt the heat, but the box itself had not changed, so the next round got bigger. Media that once stayed away was now naming the SHU, counting years in isolation, and saying out loud that some men at Pelican Bay had sat in the dark for 2 decades. In week 7, Judge Thelton Henderson signed an order that would allow refeeding of strikers, a cold reminder of how far the state would go to control the play. But before that order turned into tubes on the tier, Sacramento moved. Senator Lonnie Hancock and Assemblymember Tom Amiano promised an investigation and said bills were on the table. With that promise in hand, the men shut down the strike, not because the fight was over, but because a new lane had opened and the legal fuse was already lit. The question hanging in the air was heavy and simple. If the most feared prison in California could be pushed by unity from every car, what would happen when the case hit the courtroom next? Before the 2013 wave even hit, a class action lawsuit had been filed in May 2012, Ashker vs. Governor. The Center for Constitutional Rights, Legal Services for Prisoners with Children, and other California attorneys went to federal court for 10 men in the SHU. Those men had sat in the box between 11 and 22 years. Some transferred from other SHUs straight into Pelican Bay. The suit said the truth out loud. The men were kept in solitary for an unconscionably long period without meaningful review, and the regime was inhumane and debilitating. It argued violations of due process and the Constitution's ban on cruel and unusual punishment. The Yard had been saying it. Now the file said it too. The facts were ugly even by Pelican Bay standards. Thousands in the SHU statewide, more than 500 at Pelican Bay stuck over 10 years, 78 over 20, locked in tight concrete boxes, and almost zero normal human contact, all off vague gang tags like a name on a list, a tattoo, a drawing, or a book. The cops said was gang-related, so this was not about fresh dirt or new crimes, but about labels and secret kites, and the suit said straight up that this regime was cruel, inhuman, and set up to keep validated inmates buried on paper. The old system ran on status, not behavior, and that was the whole scam. Get validated as Aryan Brotherhood, Mexican Mafia, Nuestra Familia, Black Guerrilla Family, or an associate. And the SHU door slammed without an end date, with a review maybe once every 6 years, and even that could be shut down by a single so-called sign of affiliation, like artwork or a poem. So dudes were warehoused for decades without a write-up for SHU-level rule violation. By 2015, the state tapped out and signed a deep settlement that hit the core of Pelican Bay's fear factor. It would end indeterminate SHU time based on status and move to a behavior-based system where only serious SHU-eligible rule violations could send anyone to the SHU. The same list used for non-validated prisoners like murder, violence on people, threats to kill, weapons, distribution, escape, disturbance or riot or strike, harassment, gang activity that leads to a serious violation, serious theft or property destruction, extortion or bribery, certain sexual misconduct, and attempts or conspiracy. so the paper trick of calling a tattoo a ticket to the hole got cut off. But the yard wanted to know if the state would really run it fair or just remix the same play. Under the deal, if a validated prisoner caught a SHU eligible case tied to gang activity, they would serve a determinate SHU term and then hit a 2-year 4-step program to get back to general population, with each step adding small privileges like phone calls and some rehabilitative programming. And this was sharper than the state's earlier interim reform because it cut the program from 4 years to 2 and stopped keeping men in the SHU for minor rule breaks or for refusing forced behavioral classes. But the pressure point stayed the same. You had to make it through the steps clean or risk getting parked again. The settlement forced a fast review of everyone sitting in SHU off gang status, with the clock set at 1 year to decide who walks to general population or moves into the step down. And CDCR estimated the vast majority would get released from solitary under these terms, which was a major shift inside because the cage was finally opening for people who had been locked away without a fresh SHU eligible case. And the deal went even further for the old heads. If you had 10 or more continuous years in the SHU, you would generally be moved out of Pelican Bay's SHU and into the restricted custody general population unit to finish the path back, even if you had a recent gang-related SHU offense, unless the state could show you posed an unreasonable security risk by a preponderance of the evidence, which put the burden back where it belonged. In that case, the state could use an administrative SHU, but even then the prisoner had to get a combined 20 hours per week of out-of-cell recreation and programming, double the normal SHU time, plus 108-day reviews focused on moving them to a less restrictive spot with the assumption they were candidates for the RCIGP, which meant the system finally had to justify every extra day in the dark. The RCGP stayed high security but not isolation, movement without restraints inside the unit, out-of-cell time like other GP prisoners, contact visits, small group yard, small group classes and activities, some jobs and phone calls, all set up to rebuild social interaction with other prisoners and staff, which sounded like a different world after years of speaking through a slot. But it also meant the eyes would be on whether this new yard ran real or just became SHU with a different paint job. The settlement kept the prisoners at the table as reps, meeting regularly with CDCR to check progress, improve programming and steps, and monitor conditions, while plaintiffs' counsel received steady documentation on administrative SHU and step-down placements progress and SHU-eligible rule violations, and Magistrate Judge Vadas was empowered to review and fix individual and system violations, with staff retraining required and a no retaliation rule for anyone who joined the hunger strikes or the case, and the monitoring period was set for 24 months with the option to extend by 12 months. Blocks of constitutional violations kept popping, so the same voices that started this fight by yelling through vents were now wired into how the state runs the fix, and the next move would show if the culture changed or if the paperwork just learned new tricks. On paper, the settlement ended unlimited isolation. Pelican Bay still stayed the most feared spot. Even the fix had to be locked down by judges, reps, and timelines because the place was built to crush every car on the yard, and now the only question left is simple. When the doors crack and the rules change, how do OGs from the short corridor step back into a louder, faster yard after decades in the quiet? Since 2014, Pelican Bay added education at all levels, expanded space for classes, and pushed self-help programming. The claim is clear. People are paroling with a real chance for a better future. In a place built to lock down, school becomes a key. It gives structure, time that counts, and reasons to hold a calmer line. The message to the yard is not sweet, it is simple. Use the program or the program will use you. For many, that trade is better than years of concrete and quiet. Inside the walls sits a correctional treatment center and an infirmary. That unit handles day-to-day medical needs and can bring in specialty services when a case needs more. It also houses mental health crisis beds and inpatient medical patients. In a yard with this history, care is not a side note. It is part of the daily run. After the court's hits on medical and mental health, the system put these pieces in place to keep the population generally healthy. In a place where pressure stacks fast, doors that open for treatment can keep the lid from blowing. And once those doors open, the next move was bigger than clinics or classes. It was about changing the daily culture. That is where normalization comes in, making the inside feel closer to the outside with daily roles, vocational training, and classes that look like real life to build responsibility and respect. Peer support lets people help each other, and keep the peace when pride wants to pull knives. Becoming a trauma-informed organization means recognizing that many arrive already hurt and running programs, counseling, and education with that in mind. Put together, the pillars try to shift the energy without dropping the guard. The prison now encourages public awareness and contact through a citizens advisory committee and a family council for incarcerated people. It allows proper access for outside agencies, lawmakers, media, and the public. Staff say they take pride in delivering services while holding the main mission, public safety and trust. They even point people to pieces like life in Crescent City and the facility de-rehabilitative environment to show the work being done. For a place famous for the SHU, showing the softer side of the program as part of the new play, but the old name still carries. As of March 2022, Pelican Bay held 1,852 people, with 1,112 at Level 4 and 290 in the SHU. Those numbers mark the pressure points in real time. Level 4 means rules that bite and movement under glass. SHU means time in the box. Push and the walls push back, cross lines and the program writes your next steps, and here those steps have a rough history. An electrified fence circles the Level 2 and Level 4 yards to stop runouts. Facility A now runs Level 2 as a non-designated yard with open cells and dorm flow after a January 2024 conversion. Facility B runs Level 4 GP and holds EOP for those who need enhanced outpatient care. Facility C is closed now, the old SHU that built the echo of this place. Facility D is Level 2 N DPF with open dorms and a new state-of-the-art exercise yard. Outside the main fence, the minimum support facility runs Level 1 with dorms and a firehouse staffed by 8 full-time incarcerated firefighters. The machine is still big, tuned different, and the name still carries. Here's where the story lands, but the weight doesn't lift. The effects of solitary aren't rumors. They're proven to be psychologically and physically damaging, and that damage doesn't clock out when the door slides open. Back in 2015, Coopers had told it straight. People who have been consigned to solitary for many years feel inclined to isolate themselves after they are released, whether they go home or just move from SHU to GP. It can be treated, and that matters, but he does not sugarcoat it. The scars will remain. That's not theory. Guys reported to the same spin out on the yard and in the step-down program, like their whole personality had been flipped. Fresh interviews back it up. CCR brought in the Stanford lab to talk with men who had lived the SHU stretch. Out of a random 45 invited, 29 sat for interviews during visiting hours. Most reported severe psychological hits that still stick. Almost all described trauma-type symptoms and panic and obsessive loops, racing heart, sweating, muscle tension, nightmares, intrusive thoughts, fear of losing control. Many said GP felt chaotic and loud, like getting dropped on another planet. One called the return like going to Mars. Another said it was like taking a kid from a baby pool and throwing him into the ocean. A third said color was overloaded at first. I had to readjust. It's a joy and pleasure to be outside, to see color again. Men also reported lasting medical problems tied to years in the box. Joint pain, chronic pain, even skin changes, the price of tiny spaces and minimal movement. Lead counsel Jules Lobel did not mince words. The torture of solitary confinement doesn't end when the cell doors open. The study also flagged a weak bridge out of segment. Just under half were pushed into the 4-part step-down program. Some said parts like cognitive work helped. Many called the program unhelpful and disingenuous, and said there was no real support to ease the shock of GP. That's why Pelican Bay isn't just a joint, it's a brand that scars. The most dangerous, most feared yard in California, because the time follows you. So ask yourself, if the pain keeps running long after the door slides open, what does justice really look like in here? And when a prison can change a man's voice, his walk, his dreams, which matters more now, fewer cells or fewer scars? Let us know what you think in the comments box below. And if you liked how we presented you this video, hit that like button and make sure to subscribe for more.